welcome to Blue Collar Economics. I'm your host, Dr. Brooks Mullen, and today we're going to be talking about demand. We're going to talk about the law of demand, why the law of demand exists, and we're going to talk about the determinants of demand, the things that make demand change over time. Then that'll feed us into our next lecture where we'll talk about supply, and then our next lecture after that where we'll talk about equilibrium. So let's get started. When we talk about demand, we need to talk about the law of demand. So right off the top, there's that word that we introduced way back in our first video, a law. Remember, a law is not just a hypothesis. It's not just a proved hypothesis. It's not just a theory. It is a theory that is so fundamental and been proven true so many times and times and times and times and times and times and times that we no longer need to assume it when we build a model. It is bedrock. It is fundamental. It is taken as true. And the law of demand states that as the price of a good or service increases, the quantity demanded goes down. In other words, we have an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Why, when the price of something goes up, does the quantity we are willing and able to buy go down? Well, there are three fundamental reasons for this, one of which we've already talked about. And that first thing is the law, there's that word again, of diminishing marginal utility. As a refresher, diminishing means get smaller, marginal means of the next or incremental, and utility is satisfaction or benefit. So the law of diminishing marginal utility tells us that the more we consume of something, the less additional benefit we receive from that thing. And that matters because we will not pay more for something than the value we receive. And if the value of the next unit when we consume it goes down, then the maximum price we're willing to pay for that unit goes down. So because of diminishing marginal utility, when prices are high, we might still be willing to buy that first unit or that second unit, but we're not going to buy successive units after that. However, when the price of something comes down, we're willing to buy more of that thing. Now, we've talked about the law of diminishing marginal utility before, so we're just going to move past this. And we're going to talk about the two other things that make demand the way it is, that makes the law of demand what it is, that makes it so when price goes up, quantity goes down. And those two things are called the income effect and the substitution effect. The income effect is based on income, which is not that surprising. It's right there in the name. And how the income effect works is like this. Assuming you have a fixed income. Now, yes, income changes over the course of someone's life, but in any one period of time, income is effectively fixed. If I told you to go out tomorrow and add 30% to your income, you most likely couldn't do it. And if you could, why are you watching this video? Go out and make your paper, boo. The thing is, for a fixed income, the more expensive something is, the less of it we can afford to buy. If I've got $100 to spend on beef, and beef is $20 a pound, I buy 5 pounds of beef. If beef is $10 a pound, I can buy 10 pounds of beef. So for a fixed budget, the higher the price, the less quantity we can buy. The lower the price, the more quantity we can buy. And so again, law of demand, as price goes up, quantity goes down. As price comes down, quantity goes up. The income effect, it provides another reason for why that exists. And the third reason for the law of demand, the third reason that why when prices are high, quantity is low, when prices are low, quantity is high, is the substitution effect. So the income effect exists in a vacuum. I have a fixed budget to spend on something, and the more expensive that thing is, the less of it I can buy. The substitution effect considers substitutability. What is substitutability? It's the ability to, surprise, substitute one thing for another. So we have an effect that arises from that. For example, When the price of beef goes up, we buy less beef and we buy more chicken, or we buy more pork. When the price of beef comes down, we buy less chicken and we buy less pork. Why? Because of what we call the relative price of the good. When beef and chicken are both $5 a pound, they are relatively the same price. But if chicken's $5 a pound and beef is $10 a pound, the relative price of beef went up. The price of beef relative to the price of chicken is no longer 1-to-1, it's 2-to-1. So as the relative price of a good rises, we buy less of that good and more of the substitute good. And vice versa. When the price comes down, we buy less of the substitute and we buy more of that good. So again, 3 reasons why we have the law of demand. 3 reasons why when price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and when price comes down, quantity demanded goes up. We've got the law of diminishing marginal utility, we've got the income effect, and we've got the substitution effect. If you look on your screen, you'll see what we call a demand schedule or schedule, depending on which side of English language pronunciation you land on. Now, what a demand schedule is a table that lists price and quantity. So if you'll look at the table, you'll see we've got different prices for this good, $5, $4, $3, $2, $1. And you've got different quantity demanded at those different prices. And note the law of demand. As the price rises from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, the quantity demanded falls. So at $5, we've got a quantity demanded of 10. At $3, we've got a quantity demanded of 35. And at $1, we've got a quantity demanded of 80. As the price comes down, the quantity demanded goes up. And all a demand schedule is just a table that lists prices and different quantities demanded associated with those prices. Now, if we graph that table, we get what we call a demand curve, which you can see on the screen right now. It's just a visual illustration of a demand schedule. You can conceptualize these things as a demand schedule. You can conceptualize them as a demand curve. I would invite you to think of these things graphically, to think of them with the curve. In later videos, we're going to illustrate changes in demand and changes in supply, which we're going to do graphically as well as explain how that works out mathematically. And I know for some of you, algebra may not have been your strong suit, but visualizing these things graphically does help. I'm not going to lie. All the way through my economic education, including on my PhD qualifiers. If you don't know what a qualifier is, it's the last exam someone ever takes in their academic career. It's the final test you take in doctoral study before you move into your research phase. And even on my qualifiers, even on the hardest, most important exam I ever took, every question I got asked about supply and demand, I drew little graphs next to it because the graphs help me understand it. So if you're a visual learner, please, I invite you to understand these things graphically. If you're not a visual learner, don't worry. We're going to cover these things more than one way so they make sense to everybody. If you look at the demand curve, you will note it's downward sloping. When we make a demand curve, when we make a supply curve, we always graph them the same way. We put quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. So what do we see? As our price, as our y-axis value increases, our quantity, our x-axis value decreases. This produces the classic downward sloping line. Now, all of these things exist in the upper right quadrant. If you remember from algebra, that's the positive quadrant. Why? Because there's no such thing as negative prices, and there's no such thing as negative quantities. So all these numbers are going to start at a base of 0, and they're going to increase from there. Every demand curve is downward sloping. Well, there's a caveat to that. There are these special little things called Giffen goods that maybe if we move on to talking about intermediate economic concepts later on down the line, we'll talk about a Giffen good, but they are exceedingly rare. Giffen goods have an upward sloping demand curve, but it requires very narrow sets of circumstances. Now, it's not to say that they're theoretical. Giffen goods do exist. They've existed at a couple of times. Communist China and the market for rice. Ireland just prior to the potato famine and the market for potatoes. But outside of that, in almost every instance, demand curves are downward sloping. Now, when we call them curves, we're doing so because in reality, these are curved functions. They are not straight lines. When we illustrate these things, particularly in not the next video, but the one that's going to come after that, we're going to illustrate them in a straight line. We're going to do them linearly because they're easier to understand visually. But in reality, they are curved like that. Nature abhors linearity. Nature doesn't produce straight lines. Nature tends to produce curve functions and logarithmic functions. So when we say demand curve, even a straight line can be a demand curve. Now, a little bit of important terminology. There are two kinds of change we talk about when we talk about changes relative to supply and relative to demand. There is a change in quantity and a change in. When we say there is a change in quantity demanded, we mean movement along a demand curve, a different price with a different quantity. How do you get a change in quantity demanded? From a change in supply. How do you get a change in quantity supplied? From a change in demand. That'll make a lot more sense. 2 more videos down the line, we'll talk about equilibrium. But when we say a change in quantity demanded, we mean movement along the demand curve, a different price quantity combination on the same curve. More important, and what we're going to focus on for the rest of this video, is a change in demand. That is a shift of the demand curve, left or right, an increase or decrease in demand. An increase in demand is a shift of the demand curve to the right. It is a higher quantity at each given price, or a higher price at each given quantity. It's the way algebra works. Both of those things mean the same thing. A reduction in demand is a leftward shift of the demand curve. It is a lower quantity demanded at each price, or a lower price at each quantity. Now, what we really care about, and what you need to understand, and what's fundamentally important to understanding why prices change in the market, why consumption changes in the market, is understanding what causes demand curves to shift. And what causes demand curves to shift are changes in the determinants of demand. Exactly what the name implies. It is the things that determine the nature of demand. Now, when we talk about the determinants of demand, there are 5 major determinants of demand that I want to teach you about today. The first is changes in tastes and preferences. Tastes and preferences are exactly what they sound like. They're what we like or what we don't like. And it's very simple to understand. The more we like something, the more we prefer something, the more utility we receive from the thing, the more we are willing to pay for the thing. So, if we decide we like something more, and by we, I mean the people participating in the market for that good or service, then the demand for that good increases. It shifts to the right. You get a higher price at each quantity, or more quantity at each price. The more we like, the more we demand. The less we like, the less we demand. Now, when we talk about changes in tastes and preferences, these don't have to be logical. They can be logical, but they can also be illogical. On the logical side of things, let's make a simple example. Let's say that it's discovered that eating avocados on a regular basis dramatically reduces the risk of colon cancer. People like avocados more. They'll say, hey, I like avocados. There's more utility in avocados. If I eat avocados, they'll protect me against colon cancer. So the utility people receive or perceive goes up, and the price they're willing to pay for a given quantity goes up. And so, ceteris paribus, remember, all else held equal, if we have a sudden discovery that eating avocados dramatically reduces the risk of colon cancer, then we're going to see the demand for avocados increase. Now, that's a logical thing. Found out this thing is healthy, want more of it. You could flip that the other way. Let's say it's discovered that eating farm-raised fish dramatically increases mercury levels in the blood. I'm not saying that it does. Do your own research on that, but you might be very surprised at the amount of mercury in a lot of oceanic fish. Mercury is bad. It's neurotoxin. It destroys nervous tissue. It literally destroys your brain. People go, oh, the more fish I eat, the more mercury I eat. The more mercury I eat, the less healthy I am. So they put less utility on fish. They want less fish. At each price, the quantity demanded goes down. The demand curve shifts to the left. Now again, both those things are logical. But changes in demand, changes in tastes and preferences are not always logical. Perfect example of this is fashion. Every 10 to 15 years, the ideal hemline or waistline on a pair of women's pants moves up or down about 6 inches. Now, there's a lot of reasons they do this, largely because the fashion industry wants to get you to rebuy your entire wardrobe. So by the time you've got every outfit you need with a pair of pants with a high waist, they go, oh no, high waist is out, low waist is back in. So they get you to rebuy all those same outfits in your wardrobe again. It's a whole racket. Is it logical? No. The ideal waistline on a pair of pants, it's not like there's some magic rule for that. It just so happens to be based on fad. Fads aren't logical, they happen. So for a while there, the demand curve for fidget spinners went through the roof and then it came back down. It's a fad. It doesn't have to be logical, but suddenly there's a higher perceived utility and so there's an increase in demand, or suddenly there's a lower perceived utility and there's a reduction in demand. The next major determinant is really simple to understand. It's the number of buyers. Really simple. The more people there are that want something, the more demand there is. The less people there are that want that thing, the less demand there is. So let's talk about 2 examples and learn a little bit of vocabulary. Large-scale immigration to the United States from Mexico, that's IMM, immigration is to the United States from Mexico, has dramatically increased the demand for Mexican food and Mexican food products. Tell you a little story. When I was a wee little kid back in the 90s, yes, I am that old, I went to go visit my late grandfather in New Hampshire. And one morning, my mom and I thought it would be a really nice thing to cook breakfast for everybody. So we headed into town, we went to the local grocery store, and we decided we were going to make one of our favorite things, and one of the first things I ever learned to cook, and that's breakfast tacos. For those of y'all that are not from Texas, breakfast tacos are kind of exactly what they sound like. They're a tortilla filled with eggs and sausage, maybe beans, maybe chorizo, cheese, potato, whatever your favorites are. Personally, I like a sausage, egg, and cheese. Some other people may like a bacon, egg, and cheese or a potato, egg, and cheese. I'll stick with sausage, egg, and cheese. So we figured we'd go to the grocery store and we would get the stuff we need to make breakfast tacos. Grab some tortillas, grab some eggs, grab some sausage, grab some bacon, grab some cheese, grab some salsa. Well, we're from Texas. And even back in the 90s, every grocery store in Texas, mostly H-E-B, had tortillas, had salsa, had these things. Well, we went to the grocery store in New Hampshire and there were no tortillas, not a tortilla to be seen. They were tortilla-less. I still to this day am flabbergasted that you could have a grocery store without tortillas. There was also, most insultingly, the only salsa available was paste picante sauce. And despite what those old commercials might tell you, nobody from Texas eats paste picante sauce. We eat actual salsa. You can make it yourself if your grocery store has onions, tomatoes, jalapenos, cilantro, some cumin, salt and pepper, and whatever else you like to put in your salsa. But when we got to the grocery store, there was no tortillas, there was no salsa, there was no jalapenos, there was none of that. Now, 30, maybe 40 years later, you go to a grocery store in New Hampshire, you can find tortillas, you can find salsa. Why? Well, a large part of that is that Mexican immigration to the United States brought Mexicans and their taste in food with them, which created the demand for Mexican food products. Now let's look at the other side of that. Large-scale emigration from rural areas to urban areas in the United States. There's your vocabulary side. Emigration, E-M-I, is from to. I-M-M, to, from, E-M-I, from to. Now, large-scale emigration from rural areas to urban areas has shifted the demand for real estate. Real estate demand in urban areas has consistently increased over time, even higher than the rate of population growth, whereas demand for real estate in rural areas has decreased over time. And as we'll discuss in a later video when we talk about equilibrium, this means that home prices in urban areas are rising quickly, whereas home prices in rural areas are stagnating or going down. Our next major determinant of demand is income. Remember, demand is fundamentally based on the willingness and ability to buy something. And while willingness comes from our tastes and preferences, ability comes from our income, comes from the source of money we use to buy goods and services. Now, income does not affect all goods equally. There are two kinds of goods we consider. There are what we call normal goods and what we call inferior goods. Now, a normal good acts as you would expect. The more income you earn, the more of that good you buy. So this includes most things: real estate, automobiles, things of that nature, vacation spending, all of that. Classic example, again, I'm hungry, thinking about dinner already, is steak. The more income you make, generally speaking, if you're an American, if you're not of some religion that forbids eating beef, chances are the more steak you eat. The less income you make, chances are the less steak you eat. The more income you earn, the more real estate you buy. The less income you earn, the less real estate you buy. People with a lot of income have 3, 4, 5 properties. People with very little income may not even own one property. So these are normal goods. Income goes up, demand goes up. Income goes down, demand goes down. Now, on the other side of things, we have what are called inferior goods. Inferior goods are the opposite of a normal good, meaning when income goes up, we want less of the thing. When income goes down, we want more of the thing. Now, we could talk about discount brands. We could talk about various things that might be inferior goods. My personal favorite example is Top Ramen. I've eaten a lot of Top Ramen in my life. I went to undergrad, I went through graduate school, and particularly when we talk about undergrads don't have a lot of money. When you're going through college, there's just not a lot of money to go around. You can't have a full-time job. You're probably living on student loans. Particularly at the end of the semester, those student loans are spent and your income is very, very tiny. So when you're an undergraduate, you eat a lot of ramen. Now, when I say ramen, I'm not talking about actual ramen that's in a bowl and hand-pulled noodles and tonkatsu broth and all of that. I'm talking about Top Ramen, Nissin Ramen, Maruchan Ramen, the cheap stuff. Buy a pallet of it for $5 stuff. When I was an undergrad, I ate a ton of that. When I graduated, when I started teaching and making more money, I ate a lot less of it. Now, I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I was an undergrad, ate a lot of top ramen. When I graduated, to celebrate graduating, I took this like half a pallet of top ramen I had left outside and lit it on fire like an old school pagan and had a ceremony of no more ramen, no more ramen. Turns out doing that in 2008 when the economy is going to collapse and you've got a degree in finance, the financial sector's got 30% unemployment in a year, is a bad idea. Wish I would have kept that ramen. But now, as an adult, I barely eat top ramen. I still have a fondness for it, but that's just nostalgia. So I'll eat it once in a while out of nostalgia, but I don't buy it and eat it once or twice a week like I did when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. Now, this would go the same for anything. Walmart is a perfect example of an inferior product. Walmart actually sees sales increase during recessions as people go to Walmart to try to save money. Investing fun fact right there. If you think a recession is coming, buy stock in Walmart. They tend to do very well during recessions when income is falling. The fourth major determinant of demand is the price of related products. And here we have two kinds of related products, substitutes and complements. Now, we already talked about substitutes a bit. Substitutes are a product that can be used in place of another product. And if you don't catch the vocabulary, I'm saying product. Product is a generic catch-all for goods and services. Sometimes it's just easier to say product than goods and services. I use them interchangeably. Please don't get confused. But a substitute product is one that's used in place of another. So, for example, like we talked about before, beef and chicken, or beef and pork, or chicken and pork. So, we go back to relative prices. So, if the price of beef goes up, two things happen. Number one, the quantity demanded of beef goes down, right? Law of demand, as the price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. But on the other side, the demand for chicken, the substitute product, goes up. So we get a change in the quantity demanded of beef, movement along the beef demand curve, and a change in the demand for chicken, a shift of the demand curve for chicken. Works the same way on the other side of the coin. If the price of beef goes down, the quantity demanded of beef goes up, and the demand for chicken goes down. The other kind of related product is a complement. A complement is a product that goes with another product. So you might say peanut butter and jelly if you're an American. You might say fish and chips if you're from England. Or my favorite example of complementary products, hot dogs and hot dog buns. Why? Because a hot dog by itself is pretty useless. Most people don't eat hot dogs by themselves except for little kids. And hot dog buns are pretty much useless for anything except hot dogs. I mean, what kind of a savage tries to make a sandwich on a hot dog bun? Bread's too thin, it falls apart, you got to tear the whole thing in half. It doesn't really work. It's no good. Hot dog buns pretty much only useful with hot dogs, and hot dogs are pretty much only good if you've got a hot dog bun. So they tend to go together. If the price of hot dogs goes up, quantity demanded of hot dogs goes down, but also the demand for hot dog buns goes down. If the price of hot dogs goes down, then we have an increase in the quantity demanded of hot dogs, but at the same time, the demand for hot dog buns goes down. So substitutes and complements behave in opposite ways. So substitutes, if the price of good X goes up, the demand for good Y goes up. If the price of good X goes down, the demand for good Y goes down. On the opposite side are complements. Price of good X goes up, the demand for good Y goes down. Price of good X comes down, the demand for good Y goes up. And the final determinant of demand that we're going to talk about is consumer expectations. Remember, we are rationally self-interested creatures. We have expectations of cause and effect we have expectations of utility, we have expectations of income, we have expectations of the future, and we act on them. Now, this comes out in our economic behavior. It comes out in our demanding. If we expect to earn more money in the future, we will actually increase our demand for normal goods today. If someone expects that they're going to make more money next year and the year after and the year after and the year after, they will go out and buy a bigger house. They will go out and buy a nicer car. They will go out and demand more of products today. If they expect lower income in the future, then they buy less today. Now, when we get to equilibrium, I'm going to use this to explain the real estate crisis of 2008 and consumer spending behavior. But for now, just understand that if we expect that we're going to make more money, we start acting like we're already making more money. If we expect that we're going to make less money, we start acting like we're going to make less money. Now, here's where, again, human behavior complicates things when we study economic behaviors. Improper expectations lead to improper decisions today. So I'll leave you with a little example. When we talk about conspicuous consumption, when we talk about bad expectations and bad spending behavior, we tend to talk about athletes and musicians and famous people. So let's talk about athletes. Now, the reality of being a professional athlete is very bleak. Most careers, depending on your sport, do not last that long. In the American system, people are drafted out of college, and every year they draft a large number of people, and a lot of them will never fulfill a career. So let's look at the NFL. NFL careers tend to be very short on average. I think it's something like 3 years for the average NFL career. Now, keep in mind, that's average, right? Like a lot of people don't play a long time in the NFL. They get drafted, they don't work out, they bust out of the NFL. I'm talking to you, Johnny Manziel. Now, the thing is, improper expectations lead to improper decision making. So, you've got these contracts, and the way sports contracts works is they're very seldom flat rate contracts. They tend to be structured with a lot of performance incentives. So your NFL contract right out of college might look like this. It might say, for your first year, here's your performance metrics. If you're a quarterback, it's touchdowns and completions and things like that. If you're a defensive player, it's tackles or blocks. I'll be honest with you people, I don't know a lot about American football. I know a lot more about proper football. That's a ball, a round thing that you kick with your foot, that thing on the end of your leg, not the American system that has an egg-shaped ball and you mainly use your hands. But I do know a little bit about contracts and performance incentives. So that contract is structured where you've got your metrics you've got to meet, and if you meet those metrics, your pay goes up. So it might look something like this. This guy gets out of college, he gets signed to an NFL team, and it says, well, you'll make $600,000 this year. But if you hit all your numbers in your first year, you'll make $2 million. And if you hit all your numbers in your second year, you'll make $4 million. And if you hit all your numbers in your third year, you'll make $6 million. And then after your 3-year initial contract is up, you go into renegotiations. And if you're a good player that's making all their numbers and exceeding expectations, you'll renegotiate contracts. And that's where the big money comes in. Now, the thing about this is college athletes are not necessarily ready to be pro athletes. If you've got somebody that excelled in college sports, that person has never really failed. They've been the best player in middle school, the best player in high school. They were a D1 All-American in college. They made it in the first round draft into the NFL. They are used to succeeding. And success, not necessarily logically or correctly, breeds an expectation of success. So you've got this guy, fresh out of college, signs his first NFL contract, and despite all the odds, He does really good his first year. Instead of making $600,000, he takes home $2 million. Now it's the end of that first year, and he's thinking to himself, yeah, I'm the best. I'm going to succeed at this. I'm going to be a star. Next year, I'll make $4 million. The year after that, I'll make $6 million. And then the year after that, I'll renegotiate. I'll make $20 million a year. So I'm looking at, in the next 4 years, I'm going to earn over $30 million. So what does he do? He goes out and buys a multi-million-dollar house on a mortgage. He goes out and buys a really fancy car like a Bentley or a Lamborghini on a balloon note. In other words, 2-3 years down the line, suddenly all the money on that car is due. He goes out and spends $50,000 on a watch and $100,000 on a necklace and buys his mama a house and all those things. And then first game of his second year in the NFL, bam! He gets Joe Theismann. His knee snaps in half backwards. He tears every ligament. He never is gonna play a game again. So what has he got? He's got $2 million in earnings, $600,000 he's owed for that second season as his minimum guarantee, and he's got millions of dollars in debt. He's bankrupt. He's going to have to sell all those assets to try to pay off all that debt. And when you try to move expensive assets, you learn some things. Like the house may be worth the same amount of money or a little more than it was the year before. But if you need to sell it quickly, you're going to have to sell it at a discount. So he doesn't even clear the debt on the house. Now that brand new car he bought, when you buy a brand new luxury car, the moment you drive it off the lot, 20% of the value can disappear like that. Now, some luxury cars hold their value over time. Some don't. Manual transmissions tend to hold their value a lot more than automatic transmissions do. I'll go on forever about cars. I love cars. This is not a video about cars. But let's talk about some of those other things he bought. He bought jewelry. And here's a fun fact for all you young people out there that may not have learned a life lesson yet. Jewelry is a giant ripoff. You can never sell jewelry for as much as you paid for it. You buy a $6,000 engagement ring, get divorced 5 years later, you find out they won't even give you $1,000 for that ring, and you got to separate the stone and the gold and sell them for raw parts. Jewelry is a giant waste of money. Some watches may be collectible, but by and large, jewelry is not a good investment. Yes, the rappers are lying to you. Turns out rappers that never finished high school don't actually know that much about investment. Jewelry, not a safe place to keep your money. So, what am I saying? I'm saying that our demand behavior is based on our expectations. When we expect we're going to earn more money in the future, we start spending more money today. And if we do earn more money in the future, then hey, we can pay off those debts and everything works out. But if we don't, then we wind up in a lot of trouble. So just because consumer behavior is based on expectations does not mean that those expectations are accurate or correct. All right. Well, I hope you've learned a little bit about how demand works. We talked about the law of demand. We talked about the 3 things that make the law of demand what it is. Again, price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, price goes down, quantity demanded goes up because of diminishing marginal utility, the income effect and the substitution effect. And we talked about the determinants of demand, the things that are going to shift a demand curve. Keep those in the back of your mind. Next video is going to be about supply. The video after that's going to be about equilibrium, and those determinants are going to come back into it. And this is where, if you were my college students, I would tell you, make sure you study those determinants of demand, because that's what your exam questions are going to be based on. All right, y'all, that'll do it for us. This has been Blue Collar Economics. I've been Dr. Brooks Mullen, and I'll see y'all next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.